up, everybody? Scuffy here, and we are finally ready to do the word bear card by card. Just a quick preface. I was about halfway through recording this video a couple days ago, or so I thought. It turned out that somewhere along the way I had paused the video and did about half the recording without actually recording anything. So that really just kind of threw a wrench in my whole workinations. Um, threw some maple syrup on my pancakes. As you can see, I am your residential lumberjack today. It's a little chilly in the basement. I'm a lumberjack and I don't care. I chop the trees and I wrestle bears. I don't know if that's the words, but we're going to go with it. All right, the word bears, card by card. The word bears were the first faction in the Calth expansion, and what they brought to the table, they brought themselves a whole new interesting mechanic. They brought the Daemonhost mechanic, which kind of harkened back to all the other mechanics that kind of had evolved through the course of the game. Survivor, Terror. I think there's a ward in here as well. Flank. Where's the ward? Not, yeah, demonic eyes, that's the one. So they kind of benefited from all that in this weird, strange grab bag, as it were. And obviously, the word bears being a very demon-oriented faction, a lot of folks were curious to see how they were going to operate. And initially out the gate, they kind of came out and they kind of faltered and fumbled a little bit beyond events. So they received a major overhaul not too long ago, probably about 2-3 months ago. I might be overshadowing that. I believe it might have been about 3 months ago. It could have actually been longer at this point in time. But the overhaul has actually put them in a much better place. The big thing that we have to keep in mind, as far as the reason why the overhaul was the way it was, and why anytime you rebalance a faction, the things that you have to keep in mind, it really kind of harkens into one warlord in particular. We're going to talk about Rom when we get to him. But he's the kind of one nail that just stuck everything, making it hard to balance a faction around a warlord who was performing very well while 4 other warlords were not. Now let's talk about the warlords themselves. We're going to start off with Argel Tal. Argel Tal is a fan favorite character, personal favorite of mine in terms of the word bearers. I never liked the word bearers to begin with, lore-wise. I still don't. But Aaron Dembski-Bowden wrote an amazing first heretic, wrote an amazing character in Argel Tal, and I learned to like them and have a different appreciation of them. But ultimately, Argel Tal gets overlooked often because of his Blessed Sun ability, which allows him to start as Rom if you have 15 Chaos cards in your deck. And this is actually the first that we had seen where that's an option. Deck construction being either limited or benefited by your warlord. We haven't really seen it since. To some degree, we've seen it in the Ruinstorm faction as far as how they operate, what neutrals they're allowed to use, but we haven't seen any other warlords who get a certain benefit or a different alternate version of themselves if you include X amount of cards in your deck. I'm hoping we get to see this feature again. Argel Tal often gets overlooked as a result of that because Rom is just more popular. You can still gain the Blessed Sun and turn into Rom in mid-game if you're using Argel Tal. And I put up an Argel Tal video a couple months ago, maybe even older than that, that had a lot of, that just talked about the decks that I use with him. I really have a good time with Argel Tal. He's very flexible. His ability to deal 1 damage and then if the target dies, connect again is super effective. It can really just maximize, and for low damage exchange, you could be clearing low health troops that have high attack value that you really don't want to invest in a whole card in to get rid of, and he helps clear the way for that. I think one of the games that I shared in that particular replay was this Argel Tal beating old Canis Vertex, and that was with the old Wordbearers card pool. So, by comparing standards, it was a much significant disadvantage, but it plays just fine. He works very good. You just have to know how to build your deck, and you obviously cannot include too many Chaos cards or you end up starting the game as wrong. But I think Argel Tal is a very strong rare warlord. If you're looking to get into the faction as a whole, some green warlords, some rare warlords are always kind of iffy. I don't think Argel Tal is iffy. And ultimately, if you do want to play Rom, you have to have Argel Tal. So if you're looking to play Rom, you've got to pick Argel Tal up when he's in the shop, because that's the only way to get him. Now, while we're talking about Argel Tal, let's talk about Rom. Let's just get to that guy right quick. So he's got, right off the bat, he's got 3 attack. He has Unstoppable. He's got this Battle Honor Heal 2, which is very strong. He's Unstoppable, and he has 3 attack. That's also very strong. And because that is the case, he can threaten a lot of early and mid-game troops and not lose anything. He gains his health back unless they've got 5 attack or 3 or 4 attack. He's gaining the health back that he's lost, killing those cards. Your opponent is losing resources, and if they put down lower health troops, like 1 attack troop, he's actually gaining more than he's taking. So it's a way for him to heal up even further. He has high initiative, and he has access to the Word Bearer card pool. That's it. I mean, it's just a very tight, effective package, and that's why he's so popular. The Word Bearers pool themselves have got some stronger cards now, and that was one reason why so many of the cards that they had that were not performing very well at all had to be tooled a certain way, had to be looked at for balancing purposes a certain way, because if they made them too strong, rather than benefiting the other 4 warlords that are not performing at all or performing very low, you're just going to increase the use of 1 warlord. And we've seen this problem before. If you take a look at the game, the same thing exists within the World Eaters. The same thing could be said to exist within the Death Guard, with Mortarion really being the main warlord that's represented, and in the Thousand Sons, with Magnus being the main warlord that's represented. Now, there are certainly exceptions, and times vary. Garrow and why am I drawing a blank on this guy's name all of a sudden? Garrow and Durak Rask are optimal warlords. Araman is seeing a lot of play right now, a lot, but ultimately you can't just balance a faction and not take into consideration the stronger tools. The same thing goes to say with like Numian and the Salamanders. It's one reason why the faction as a whole hasn't seen a huge power surge, is because you've got a warlord who can consistently keep those troops survivor, and so there's some balance there. So just kind of keep that in mind. Now, talking about a different way to do deck construction, Erebus is another warlord who brought in a different way to kind of play the game. He actually has this feature that is not seen anywhere else, and this is to be able to create a Summoning Rift, which starts out as a 3/3, but it's a unit that is not targetable by your opponent whatsoever. No board clears, random destructions, nothing. It's essentially taking up a spot on the deck, but it's not doing anything. And then every turn that he spends 2 energy, it gets one of these abilities, as well as +2/+2, so it gets stronger and stronger and stronger. Initially, that spawn still had maintenance, so it prevented it from just pumping out spawns and and being able to have them generate and then pump out another spawn. That has been removed. He has low initiative, which works against him, but he plays okay. He plays all right, and I think some of the cards that have been changed enhance his game style, his play style, give him a little bit more breathing room. He's not a bad warlord. If you dislike Erebus in the fiction, you may dislike Erebus in the game. He plays differently, if that makes sense. That's just the best way I can explain it. He plays differently. I've had fun with him, but I've also had games where I felt like because of his ability, he's not. You have to either to say, hey, I'm investing, or I'm cutting all ties from investing this game because I have to respond to the threats of my opponent. And some of those games, that's what your opponent wants to do. And when they get you to do that, you are at a disadvantage. So it's really tricky to gauge with him. Whereas Argel Tal can flex. He can choose to use his ability, choose not to use his ability. He can choose to go into ROM. He can choose not to go into ROM. I think Argel Tal is a very versatile warlord. He's got several various builds, and he's got a good ability. Erebus, you're really building around the ability and ways to respond to your opponent more than anything else. Loregar is... I played Loregar for quite a bit before we got these warlord stats added on here. I had a lot of fun with him. The same thing goes for Argel Tal. Like when they came out, and a lot of people say Loregar is underpowered. To some degree, that's true. His ability doesn't do anything for you much. You get a dark gift in your hand, which a dark gift is just a random Daemonhost. So it's kind of like a mark of chaos, essentially, but with Daemonhost essence. It reduces the cost of your maintenance of your demons. It reduces the maintenance cost by 1. So that's a very nice passive, but it's not aggressive. He has no aggressive ability whatsoever. And if your opponent has a game on the board where you have to respond to it, then you're not creating dark gifts. So that's a problem. And his whispers ties into having demons, right? So he wants to have demons. He wants to have multiple demons. His Whispers of Chaos can very quickly go from a cost of 6 to a cost of 4 in one turn, but it also varies. So very well, your opponent clears out some demons, and the next turn it's right back up to 12. And you have to play a demon for it to get down to 10. So it's a very tricky balance. He's orchestrating the song, as it were. However, I think it's balanced in the fact that I personally believe that Loregar's Reckoning, or his Whispers form, Loregar Transfigured, is arguably one of the best, if not the best. Definitely my favorite. Is it my favorite? It's up there. It's in my top 3 Reckonings on the game. He gets to ignore the maintenance cost of your demons, just flat out, right? He's upgraded his passive. But then he has this amazing ability that deals 2 to 3 damage for 1 energy. And if the target dies, you get a lesser demon. So you're killing something of theirs, you're gaining something of yours for 1 energy. That's insane. That's huge value. So the reward is worth the struggle. And if you're building to go for Whispers Loregar, that's a very tight build. You have to be you have to make some very good deck construction concepts there. So you'd have to make some conscious deck decisions there to go for his Whispers, but it is a very powerful Whispers, and you can use this on your own units. So, like, you have a Nurgling that attacks for 1, and then you just it's still alive. It's got 1 health left. You use your Loregar ability, turn it into another lesser demon. The Nurgling goes back up to your hand. You throw down the Nurgling. So now you got 2 demons, and it goes from there. Or you kill an opponent's 6 attack troop that has 2 health left. Kill it. They lose that troop. You get a Beast of Fire. Just a fantastic exchange for 1 energy, and then you can continue to play your game. Very powerful, very tricky to do. But I do agree that his early game, his non-Whispers game, as it were, is very non-aggressive. He's very troop-focused, and if he doesn't have any troops, he can't give those dark gifts too. So it's a very tough game. He's not straightforward as you would think. He's very tricky to play. That being said, if you can make him work, you have a lot of fun with them. As you can see there, I've got the 5 for 5 in practice. I've had a lot of fun with him in practice well before that. I played him a little bit in ladder. I was going to play him in Lodge Wars 4, or was I going to play him? I was going to play him in World Cup. I passed on playing him in World Cup for Lehman Russ, I think it was. So, I mean, he's got range. You just have to know how to play it, and that's the tricky part. Now, Zardolac. I'm going to talk about Zardolac for just a second here. Before I talk about Zardolac, I'm going to talk to you about Korffeiron. Have you heard the word of our Lord and Savior, Korffeiron? I say that with sarcasm, but Korffeiron and Zardolac were 2 warlords who were in an event to determine which would be the 4th warlord added to the game for the Word Bearers. And as you can see, Zardolac won that battle, but it is a battle that is still held with salt and bitterness to this day by many and by few, depending on which side of the war that you were on. Now, Korffeiron had an ability that worked very nicely, generated a cultist for 2 energy. He had low initiative. Zardolac has a different ability. It's a damage dealing ability that deals 1 to 2 damage to an enemy and adjacent units. That's not too shabby. That's pretty decent. 2 energy to potentially do, a spread of damage. He also starts with the Enactus Blade. Initially, Zardolac had 30 health as opposed to 35 health, and after a little bit of play and some time, they realized the error of that, and they gave him the additional 5 health, and I think that makes a difference. But the Enactus Blade is essentially a 3 energy tactic that gives a friendly Astartes only on this one, Daemonhost twice, and then it gains backlash. You put the Enactus Blade back in your hand. Now, if that troop is jammed, if that troop is shuffled into your deck or returned to your hand, that blade is not coming back. It goes away with them. So keep that in mind. But it's a great way to put on a quick 2 Daemonhost onto a troop. That's about it. It's not something that you're going to be using too often. I think when it comes to a tactic like that, you get more use out of it. Something like that with like Hibu Khan, because he's got a lot of fast troops. With Zardolac, you've got to build a board. You've got to have a troop that survives that you want to give that to, and then on top of that, the Daemonhost abilities, while they are generally survivor based or increasing the likelihood of keeping a troop on the board either via attacking or doing more damage. There's a couple that aren't, mainly Cleave 2 and Flank. Uh, None of them increase the attacks or the health of those troops. That's contingent upon other factors in there. So you don't want to give your Nactus Blade to a low health troop if it's not going to make a difference. They got terror and they've got 2 attack, and it's not going to do anything for you. So usually you hold that for your later game. Overall, though, as you can see, I've had fun with him. I actually don't mind Zardu. He plays very good. He's got a lot of flexibility. His ability is nice. The Nactus Blade can make for some nice additions later in the game. He's pretty decent, and that's okay. That's okay to have. So, and when it comes to Warlords, I would honestly say if you're looking to get into the faction, Argel Tal is a great rare. Gives you 2 Warlord options. Very flexible, and you can actually play him with or without a lot of word bearer cards, depending on which way you want to go. I think Zardolac is also really good. He's a good Warlord to pick up. He gives you some breathing room. He lets you dip your toe in the Daemonhost water, so to speak, and he has a way of dealing with things on the board, especially as we're seeing the Defenders of Caliban. His damage just can attack adjacent units, so you don't have to target those if they have duplicitous. So that's one kind of way to get around that. So kind of keep that in mind. Loregar and Erebus, you really have to want to build them and want to play them. They are trickier to do. Personally, out of the 4 Warlords, I probably have the most fun with Argel Tal, but Loregar really is a second for me. Zardu is good, but thematically and the way Loregar plays, especially his late game, I cannot deny that's just it's been fun. Bortle Squad. Now, Bortle Squad. These are one of the cards that got updated as a revision. First, they just had this rally that gives +1/+0 to your infantry troops, and that was kind of it. They now have this backlash to put in play a Cygnus Acolyte. And this is one of those features that the faction really needed, is they needed a way to put bodies or keep bodies in play to use for future purposes. The Cygnus Acolyte is a new warlord through Malevolence with a backlash, give +1/+1 to a random friendly infantry or demon troop. So you're getting 1 troop for 1 troop for 2 cards, and one of those troops enhances other cards that you've got, and you have some synergy promoted within that card. It's a very good card. Following its update, I found that it works very well in several of the decks, especially ones that you want to have infantry units for later on in the game, especially for cards like Ashen Circle. So those guys are actually very good. They're tight fit. Daggetol Bikes also got a nice upgrade. Before they were just a 3/2 flank, and it was okay. For a common, that's okay, but the rally effect that they gained is so much better. The random enemy with stealth loses it. This is an ability that is previously, or still is, on Skitarii Protector, the 5 energy frontline from the Mechanicum faction. Well, now you get that ability on a 2 energy troop that also has flank. So you can drop the stealth and respond to the stealth with the same card. You're not losing a whole lot of energy for it. Just a very good card. This is a common. I feel like this is a 2 of in recommendation for Word Bearers decks. It allows you to respond to stealth troops, and it just gives you a flanking option. If there aren't any stealth troops, it's still very flexible. Dark Blessing got a update as well. Before this just gave Daemonhost to a friendly Astartes. Now gives Daemonhost +1/+0 to a friendly Astartes, which increases the attack of it. And that is your way to get a stat buff. Now you're not getting any health buff, but you might get Survivor 3. You might get some additional stats if it already has several demon hosts on it and it begins to gain +2/+2. Dark Blessing is really good for those end games where you're able to use it 4 or 5 times and give all the demon hosts, and as well as an additional +4/+5 attack, and then go from there. As a tactic within a deck, I think you really only need to have 1 Dark Blessing to maximize it. The Word Bears have a lot of other ways to kind of move around and be flexible, but Dark Blessing is kind of your way to up the ante when you need to, but you don't really build on having to. I think I've never really seen a need for using Dark Blessing 5 times and then the next turn doing it again. Typically, that's kind of an end game. I did it, I secured my board, or I used it 5 times and killed my opponent. So if you're looking to pick it up, just pick up one. Bortles Squad is not worth mentioning. These guys are probably in a few event decks as a 2-3 cost, but they do nothing. They're unstoppable. That's it. They don't have a rally effect. They don't have any other purpose. They do nothing. Pass. Don't include those in your deck. Heralds of Truth is not bad in that it gives your troop sacrifice add a lesser demon to your hand. And if you want to get a lot of demons, that's a way to go. And you also get a draw card. The problem is you have to have several troops on the board. The good thing is that's not a problem to do with the word bearers. That's very possible to do, and this is a great way for Loregar especially to keep troops in hand, but also have demons too. You have to time it right. But I like this card a lot. This card has potential. You don't see it played often. I think you don't see it played often because, quite frankly, Loregar isn't played often. But I think there's definitely ways to make that work. Also, just being able to have, like, through the course of 3 or 4 troops attacking, gaining 3 or 4 lesser demons. That's a good way to go. You don't lose anything. You might lose what's on the board, but you have assets in hand still. And that's very powerful. Now, Terran Reality is also another powerful card. This is a card that came out. It wasn't the first, because Underverse for the Space Wolves was the first that put cards back in decks. But this allows you to basically put one of your friendly troops and a random enemy troops. This is kind of like a soft removal, so to speak. It's random, but you get to pick which of your guys are going back. And this is a way to get around troops that have ward on them, or troops that have just too much built in, and you're able to whittle down other things and hope that you get that Survivor 5, Attack 9 troop gets back shuffled back into the deck. That's a great card to go. The downside with it is, against warlords who don't run troops, this does nothing for you. As a matter of fact, it penalizes you because you're just putting one of your cards back in your deck for nothing. So this card I had a lot of in my decks. I had 2 of in all my decks, and for a while there it worked really well, and eventually I've settled on having 1 of in a deck. I think if we see more troop increases, if the Dark Angels and Defenders of Caliban are properly balanced, which we can assume is going to happen at some point in time, we'll see more troops on the board, in which case Terran Reality may be effective. Maybe, because the more troops that are on the board, it also diminishes the potency of that random effect. So you might go from having 1 Terran Reality to having 0, and in place having a Defensive Satellites. But it is a good card. It's something to consider, but you don't want to just cycle your guys back in for like a cheap threat. If it's not a long-term threat that you can't deal with via your ability or via other troops, you might want to stomach it out for a turn or 2, because if you have put all your stuff back in your deck and you don't have any other cards drawing cards, you're running out of resources and you can shortchange yourself very quickly. Testament Veritas. Now, this is a card that got better as well. This just had +1/+1 to your demons. And it gained, if you control no demons, put in play a Chaos Spawn, and that's a 3/3 maintenance 1. So this is going to give you a 3/3 troop for 2 energy. But if you're also going demon heavy, it's a card that can enhance all your demons. So you're either going to get a troop with it for 2 energy, or you're going to get a lot of demon buffs. And that's a very versatile card. Again, a card that works well with Loregar. I've seen it with Erebus as well. But you've got to build for that. And Loregar not seeing a whole lot of play means you're not seeing this card a whole lot. I wouldn't put 2 of these in a deck. I would put 1 of these in a deck. I think 1 is sufficient enough. But it's not a bad card. It's a good common. 2 energy, another good card at 2 energy, and this is a rare, is Zego Squad. These guys are 2 copies. 2 copies in every one of your decks. For 2 energy, you're getting 3 troops right out the bat. 2 of those troops you're going to want to be able to have and utilize for your Ashen Circles, for your Kursetha. Is it Kurseth or Seth Kurtha? Kurtha said, man, I am just not nailing names today. What's the deal? Those are very handy. These guys combo. They're good early game. If you get them out, they do things for you on the next turn. Late game, they're just as good too, because they combo with your other troops and they can gain extra abilities. So very flexible card. definitely worth having 2 of in your deck and playing them. You want to make sure you're playing them. You've either got a card in hand that's going to enhance them the next turn, or you're going to play them with a card that they're going to benefit from. Don't just throw them out there. Play them smart. Dark Oratory. This is one of those cards that you could play with the Zezegel. I don't like it with Zezegel. I feel like drawing 2 cards is great, but at the very least you're just giving +2/+0 to your troops. That does nothing else for you. You've got 2 cards in hand. It's a card that kind of just loses some steam a little bit. I think if you had more cards that had higher health and you played this late game, that's great, but there's other cards to play in place of that for drawing 2 cards. For the cost, it's a fair price cost. 3 energy to draw 2 cards, and you gain a bonus to your troops. But in practice and effect, I think there's just better ways to go about it. I don't run with Dark Oratory. I've seen it used. I've seen it used where my opponent gets +2 attack on everything. Doesn't win the game, but it looks scary. I've seen it where they get 2 cards and they don't get any +2 attack, and then they just are sad. So, pass. Fanatical Zeal. Here's another card that was enhanced. More updates. Before we had the 3 heal 3 to your units, which was not bad. 3 energy common that heals 3 to your units. We're talking about a lot of troops here that have no way to gain health, right? So this is a way to keep them alive. That was it. That's all it did. But now, in addition to that, if you don't have any troops, you get a random 2-cost cultist. So for 3, you're getting a troop, in the same way that Testament Veritas is giving you a demon. Oh, I must be getting some lodge updates here. But it's a good common to have. It works very well in Erebus, helps keep him alive, gives him a body to either distract the opponent or to use on your next turn. It works very well in ROM as well. Again, we're going back to, watch out what you do to balance ROM, and it works good for Loregar too. It's just a good card to have. And late game, if you've got several troops that are low health, you can heal your whole board for 3, and that's nice. Bortles Squad. Another card that got an update. I might say that like another 5 or 6 times here before we're done. These guys before, they just had, instead of a rally effect to put in play a Wounded Zealot, they just had their Relentless as their rally effect. So they destroyed a friendly infantry and they gained Daemonhost twice. And it seemed like scary at first, but then in practice, especially looking at the Daemonhost, sometimes that would equivalent to nothing. You kill one of your troops to gain a troop that had terror and, flank, and flank, it wouldn't be a bad choice, but you're still losing an infantry to do that. Whereas this way, you're putting out a infantry that you can either combo with other cards, as we said with Zego Squad, or you're putting in play to work with his ability on the next turn. You're still getting 2 troops your opponent has to respond to. You're putting threats on the board rather than taking threats away, and that's important. In practice, I found that works better. Obviously, it's an improvement from what they were, but it's not great. Gaining Daemonhost twice sounds nice, but on a 3 attack, 3 health body, it doesn't do much for them. Unless they gain Survivor 2, they're not going to last more than an attack or 2. They're not going to gain anything out of it, and you're better off with your 3 energy looking into other cards that are going to hopefully last longer. We're going to take a look at one of those in just a sec. Colex Support Squad. These guys have not changed their ability. It's a strong Relentless, right? Destroy a friendly infantry and deal 5 damage to the enemy warlord. The problem is it's a telegraph play. Your opponent can see it coming. They can respond to it very easily, whether that means destroying your friendly infantries or just destroying this troop, and they have very low health. Artwork-wise, it looks nice, but this card sees play in events, and that's about it, because everybody else who is cognizant of how that works just don't include it. It's just not worth including at all. Sword Backpaw is probably, in my opinion, maybe the second best legendary in the faction. When a friendly Astartes infantry troop dies, put in play a Chaos Spawn. And that's going to be happening a lot. You're going to have a lot of Astartes infantry die, whether they're dying to your abilities, whether they're dying from attacking the opponent, or vice versa. This guy is just very effective at keeping a board up on you, like giving you 3/3 troops, and they're 3/3 troops. That's not too shabby. Very, very good, effective troop. One of the classic turn 1 plays is Zego Squad. Your opponent either doesn't isn't able to kill all 3 of those troops, the next turn you start backpaw, and now you've got 2 to 3 chaos spawns, and you're sitting pretty good. And now they have to get rid of this guy, or you're just going to start dropping more troops. Late game, it's even better if you've got several troops on board. You throw a Goldstone Hunters out, you deal 3 damage, you get a 3/3 chaos spawn. There's just so many ways to go about it. He's very good. He's a very, very strong supporting character, supporting troop compared to his stats. He puts in miles. Now, talking about troops that have Daemonhost that have a way to stay on board with some longevity, Torgal Squad has that. They've got 4 health, which is just a smidge higher than the 3 health, but that works in their favor because they've also got Battle Honor, gain Daemonhost, and heal 2. And if you are able to give them Battle Honor or Daemonhost previously, that they have a Survivor 3 or they have a Ward or Terror, enough to allow them to do more damage, gain another Daemonhost, heal 2. After attacks, they're gain Daemonhost over and over again. Their attacks or stats are going up. These guys can become quick threats. For a common, that's not bad. They're a very good common, especially one that gains Daemonhost. They can gain it repeatedly. It's not a bad card to have. If I had to choose between the two, I'd probably go with Torgal over Gorlum, unless I'm building my deck to really focus on having Zealots in play so I can do something with them. And there's a lot of incentive to do that. Ashen Circle saw an update here. Now these guys, their abilities were the same. They sacrifice, deal 2 damage to all enemies. They had Rally, destroy friendly infantry, and gain fast. But their attack went up to 5 instead of 4. They were a 4/4. And that means that for 4 energy, if you've got an infantry on the board, you have potentially either 5 direct damage to your warlord or 7 damage to a target and 2 damage to the rest of the board. That's very strong. And that's very effective. 7 damage to a target. These guys for 4 or for 6 if you play a Zezegol before them, guaranteeing them the ability to use their ability. That's a good exchange. 5 energy fast can win the game. Definitely a must-have, must include. As an epic, they're very strong, solid epic, very supporting troop. Troop support that you want to have. And I like the improvement that they had. It's just a little notch up, but it's a deserving notch for what they do and for their rarity. Now, Book of Loregar is one of those cards that you don't include in your deck unless you are doing specifically demons. If you don't have any demons in your deck, this card does nothing for you. If you have a couple demons in your deck, this card might do something for you. If you have a lot of demons in your deck, this card is going to be a value card to play. To that extent, there are only a couple warlords, Loregar and Erebus mainly, who might benefit greatly from the Book of Loregar. The others either don't need it, or it's not going to matter the way that they play the game to have maintenance ignored or not. And the 2 lesser demons that it adds to your hand are nice. They're not cost reduced, but they don't have maintenance, so there's a benefit there if you could play a 4 energy, ignore the maintenance of all of the demons for the rest of the game, and those 2 demons could be the seducers. Right, the 5/4 fasts. Well, that wouldn't be too bad if you had a 5/4 fast and a 5/4 fast, and that's not a bad card to have. But in terms of legendaries, you really don't need to pick this up unless that's exactly what you want to do. If you want to run with a lot of demons, if you want to build a Whispers Loregar deck, or if you want to build a Demons Host, not Demon Host, but rather just Demons Word Bearers deck with Testament Veritas, then that's absolutely fine. It's not bad to have, but I wouldn't spend gems. I wouldn't recommend spending gems on this unless that's specifically what you need. It is not a tool that is going to enhance anything else for you. Gaelic Squad got an update as well. These guys just had sneak attack before. They were 5/3 sneak attack, which did nothing for you. If your opponent had like a Seek and Destroy, or they were Abaddon, or anything else, they were just kind of like a target that your opponent was going to respond to. But they now have this really decent effect here. Rally, destroy friendly infantry, and gain ward. And I have used that to advantage several times, where you throw out a little infantry, you give these guys ward, and now your opponent, depending on who their warlord is, has to either take 5 to the face and throw out some additional damage, or they've got to throw out some random damage in hopes that it's enough to do the job. And if they don't, they're going to take another 5 on your next turn. And with the The recent debuff to Goldstone Hunters, being a 3 attack with fast, now it's a conditional fast. These guys have even more longevity, so very good card. I think often overlooked for Jadimus Squad or Ashen Circle, but I think if you can find a way to make them work for you and squeeze in one in your deck, it's enough to do the job. Also, I just like the pose. I like the picture here. That's some nasty damage. Some nasty blade work going on. Harbingers of Chaos is not a good card. Pass on that. This harkens back to the treachery cards of the first factions that were released in the game. Cards like Treachery that just give marks of chaos to all your troops. This gives Daemonhost to all your troops. But as we've covered, Daemonhost, unless you're giving Ward or Survivor 3, doesn't up the stats, doesn't up their survivability, and I mean, at best, you could say here, at least it gives it to your infantry troops as well as your Astartes. I mean, that's an upsell, I guess. But I just say pass. Don't include this in your deck. It's not worth it. Instead, include Jadimus Squad. This is an actual troop that gives you more troops at the end of your turn. So for 4 energy, right off the bat, you're getting a 2/3 plus another 2/3 that can create Marks of Chaos. And Marks of Chaos are always useful, unless they're the Mark of Nurgle, right? So that's not too shabby. These guys can quickly become a thorn in your opponent's side, especially if you follow it up with another Jadimus Squad in your next turn, or if you give them a Mark of Chaos and they get the Mark of Tzeentch and they go into stealth mode and then they're just pumping out cultists from behind the scenes. Just a great card. Again, as a rare, 2 of in every deck. I think a lot of the rares, quite frankly, are very recommended, high recommended. You don't need to have the legendaries in this faction to make work. Epics are good to have. Rares are better. Raising a Monarchia. I see this played occasionally, and I never see it benefit my opponent. Don't play this card, guys. Just don't. It's not great. Like while the Word Bears have a lot of Astartes, and this gives +1/+1 to all Astartes in your deck, and you get to draw a card. Just looks good. It looks like a solid card. It doesn't work. The 4 energy, and I'll tell you why. The reason being is, as we've covered, you've got Jadimus Squad, you've got Gaelic Squad, you've got Ashen Circle. Theoretically, you could even have Book of Loregar or Sword Backpaw plus a 1 energy. The 4 energy turn is very big to play troops. It is not a good time for the Word Bearers to play a tactic that is going to give +1/+1 to Astartes in your deck. Not even ones in your hand, in your deck. It's a huge loss of momentum in the same way that the 5 energy could be a loss of momentum for some games. If you throw like a Forge Complex on a Warlord, it's not going to do anything for you. And in certain games, that by the time it does something for you, it's much too late. Raising a Monarchia does not pay dividends. And another 4 energy troop that you'd rather play is Zethalon Squad. Again, there's just so many troop options at 4 energy. Pass on Raising Monarchia. Instead, play a troop. Zethalon Squad is another strong 4 energy troop. 4/4 stats, very solid. For 1 energy, it's going to continue to pump up Righteous Zealots, which are troops that when they die give you troops. So it's a troop that gives you troops, that gives you troops. Yo, dog, we heard you like troops, so we gave you some troops that gave you troops with troops. That's a meme. I'm going to meme it right now. So these guys are good. They're prime ambassador Melgator bait, obviously, but for a common and for what they do for the faction, they're really good. Again, 4 energy, pass on Raising Monarchia, pass and then put in Zethalon Squad. That's the way I want to word that. Daggetol Squad. Now I've seen these guys a couple times thrown down, but by the time that they're thrown down, they don't do much or they get bounced because of that 4 attack. But they're not bad. For 2 energy, they deal 4 damage, and that can go to any target, including a Warlord. If the target dies, they gain Daemonhost, which is a nice effect, and they've got 6 health. That's a really strong support heavy squad. I think they get passed on, though, because just the higher rarity cards, the 5 energy cards, there are a couple other choices. As far as if you don't have these rares, if you don't have Dark Brethren, Diabolus Full, or Kurthus Said, don't feel ashamed. Put in Daggetol Squad. This is a good, strong 5 energy, and if this is not destroyed by your opponent or returned or something, you're going to gain benefits from this. You're going to deal 4 damage every turn, and theoretically, you could potentially deal 4 damage to their troops and gain a stronger troop. It's a good card. It really is. I think it just gets outclassed by higher rarities down the road. Speaking of higher rarities, Dark Brethren here. This is your Gal Vorbach. Some great artwork here. Gain Daemonhost when enemy dies. That's pretty straightforward. And if your opponent has got several troops on the board, we've seen this with Runestorm throwing down the Plague Bearer, right, and gaining Daemonhost or Demon mutations. These guys can gain Daemonhost effectively, and if you kill 2 or 3 troops, boom, right off the bat, Dark Brethren gains Survivor, gains Terror, gains Flank, uses Flank to kill another troop, and then that flank, then they gain Survivor 3 or Ward. These guys can quickly snowball out of hand, and because they've got 5 attack, they are immune to a Bastard Melgator. This is a strong card. Now, the flip coin of that is the Diabolus Vol, which is some great artwork here, but they're a 4/5 rather than a 5/4. And then instead of when a enemy dies, when a friendly unit dies, they give +1/+0 to your demons. Now, because they have Rally gain Daemonhost, that means that they count as demons. And there is something fun to say about the Diabolus Vol fireworks show when you've got 2 of those on the board and you start killing your own units and fireworks go off, giving attack to all of your units, and you get +1/+1, +1/+1, +1/+1. And your Nurglings go from 1/3 to 3/3 very quickly, or it's just nice. These guys are really cool. It's a tough call sometimes between which do you use. I would say why not both, but sometimes your deck just kind of has to necessitate that there's only one that you can include. They're both really good. They're both good rares. I don't have a preference for one or the other, although I do think playing Diabolus Vol and seeing that Daemonhost benefit gain across the board is really fun to watch. Camille is as a damage dealing tactic. This is a just for 5 energy, you're dealing 4 damage. That in itself isn't fantastic, but for an additional kicker, if that target dies, you're dealing 2 damage to all enemies. That means that you're dealing splash damage as well as the 4 damage. It's kind of like a defensive satellites that's crashing out of the sky. Just a great card. Just a great card. There's no reason not to have 2 of those in the deck. Again, we're talking about rares that are just shining, and I think the faction as a whole, and some of those cards have seen some updates. Let's not be shy about that. Bortle Squad saw an update. Jadamus did not, but Gaelic did. Dark Brethren, Camille, you can make a very strong Word Bearers deck with just rares, honestly, and a couple epics. You don't need to have high rarity cards. They work well for that. Kurthus said got better. Before he had just the sacrifice, put in play a greater demon. That was it. He was a hard removal target. You were going to get maybe a greater demon from him if he lived. But now he's got this rally where you destroy a friendly infantry and he gains Survivor 2. So he has a harder time, harder. It's harder for your opponent to get rid of him, essentially. That Survivor 2 goes miles. You can follow it up with Daemonhosts after that, giving him an additional Survivor 3, or giving him, flank. You don't want to give him Terror, because then you can't use his sacrifice, but I think he's gone up in value for what he can do now. He still can be hard removed, right? He's not gaining ward. He's not gaining anything like that. But that Survivor 2 makes him at least immune to some higher cost flanking cards. There's going to have to be another resource that your opponent has to throw at Kurthus said. Otherwise, they run the risk of having a Devourer of Worlds or a Father Decay hitting the board, or a Yuria the Seducer. A very good legendary. He's a solid legendary. Loregar Squad, another card that got an update. I hope we're counting. I hope someone's keeping track here. I might have to put a tally counter on this video at the end, how many times I said that. Unstoppable. These guys initially were 5/5, and then their sacrifice. They have the sacrifice ability to give +1/+1 or +2/+2 to your demons. They no longer do that. Instead, what they do is they put in play a random 2-cost cultist. And I don't see these guys played. For the same reason, I think, honestly, I don't see Bargatal support played. At 5 energy, they just get overshadowed by the rares. But this is actually a really good ability. In the same way that Jadamus Squad and that Bortle Squad are putting in troops. Now, granted, there's our backlash, or at the end of turn, this guy is more of a sacrifice. You're still getting a 2-cost cultist. You're still getting bodies on the board. You're still gaining troops that create troops. So if you're looking to start up a Word Bearers deck, and you don't have some of those high rarity cards, I think Bortle Squad, or Loregar Squad rather, is Bortles and Loregar are both really good options for commons. They're not something to just ignore and pass on. As time goes on, you get higher rarity cards. You're probably gonna you replace them out, but they put in work. If they're not destroyed, they're going to do 5 damage for you, and you're also going to get a troop to utilize, whether that is for Ashen Circle effects, whether that is for effects that are bolstering the health or the attack of your troops. Just a good card. Secret Devotion. This is kind of like the Chaos Ornitov's Barge in the fact that you're getting a random 2-cost cultist for each enemy, and that can be a lot of 2-cost cultists. The downside is that none of those cultists have frontline, and many of those cultists have very low health. So it's a toss-up. I don't think this card is really something you should play. If you're in a position where you're playing this card to gain 4 cultists, even 3 cultists, they're not going to live the next turn, and you're not going to be able to benefit anything from them. If this card costs less, if this card costs 3 or 4, and you had the same effect, you could combo it with some other cards at late game intervals. But otherwise, you're just creating bodies on the board that your opponent has got the troops to respond to and deal with, and that's not going to do anything for you. Dark Channeling. Pass on this. There's an epic. This looks good. The art is fantastic. I just like that style. This looks gritty, looks grim and dark, right? What is not to fear there? Look at all those ribbons. Look at all those ribbons hanging off of that. All those dark oaths, man. Add 3 lesser demons to your hand. They cost 2 less. I think this was aimed for like a Whispers Loregar deck, and the fact that you can get some demons that cost 2 less, and you can get 3 different lesser demons. That's nice. But 6 energy is a steep cost, and you could lose some momentum there depending on how the game is going. You might want to put 1 of in your deck for that specific demon build, but outside of that, this card doesn't do anything for you. You're better off using troops, using a 6 attack for troop deploys, or for playing something like this, which is Destiny's Hand that deals damage to all units, and then also puts troops on the board. For each unit killed, play a Chaos Spawn. This is fantastic. Now that we've seen Heart of Caliban, right? Let's for those who haven't, or for those who need a reminder, what is Heart of Caliban? Is that one of those new cards? Yes, it's one of those new cards. Now that we've seen this, I wonder what would happen if, the next turn, your opponent put out all those flankers and they did 5 damage to you with pings. Psh, Jaegers, pinging you. You got Jaegered for 5, and then the next turn you follow up and kill all those Jaegers, and you get 5 Chaos Spawns. The downside of this is it also damages your units too, so you have to keep that in mind. But if it kills your troops and you're getting Chaos Spawns, you're not losing anything. If it deals 2 damage to your Warlord, that can be a problem late game, but this is a good card to have for decks that don't mind having demons in play. If you have Loregar, he ignores the maintenance cost of those Chaos Spawns, so it's a very strong card for Loregar for that specific reason. For others, it might just be a one of in their decks. It's funny that that's Erebus's Battle Barge. Yeah, I'm just not a fan of Erebus. Now, Malnor Squad, these guys are an epic that do put in work. They get +1/+1 in frontline to infantry troops you put in play. So that 2-cost cultist that has 2 attack, 3 health now becomes a 3/4 frontline from Jadamus Squad. Or you play these guys here, you play Malnor Squad, and then you attack with Bortle Squad, and Bortle Squad dies, and you get a Cygnus Acolyte that is 2/2 frontline with that backlash ability. Or you have, there's just, these guys can put in the work. They comboed very well with Korffeiron. Not to bring up Korffeiron again, but I'm going to. They comboed really well with his ability, because for 8 energy, you could drop Malnor Squad, you could use his ability to create a cultist that now is +1/+1 in frontline, and some of those, if they're like a Righteous Zealot, now they're a 3/3 with frontline, that when they die, they put in play a 2/2 with frontline. Yeah, you could put in play a 2/2 with frontline. Now, as a 6 energy cost, it's hard to combo them very well, but it's ways that you can combo them. You could put in, for 9 energy, you could put in Malnor Squad, you could put in Goldstone Hunters, and you could gain a 4/3 with frontline that has fast. Think about that. Possessed Marine. Now, these guys are probably one of the few that got a downgrade. You can argue that they got a downgrade. They have Cleave 2. They have Rally, gain Daemonhost. Before they had Cleave 2 and Ward, which is nice, right? That's a strong combo. These guys would hit the board. Your opponent would be like, oh, I don't have any random removal. That's going to hurt. The artwork is just killer. Look at that axe. Look at those horns. but they changed it so that rally now you can gain Daemonhost to gain ward. The problem with him having ward already is that ward that he had on the old version did not count as a Daemonhost. So if you gave him Daemonhost, he could gain a second copy of ward, which is nothing. If he gains a second copy of cleave, he gets cleave 4. But if he gains second ward, he gains nothing. So theoretically, you could actually spend more Daemonhosts trying to buff him up with less effect than you could for other troops, and that's why they changed that. It does feel like a downgrade, and he could potentially get that ward back, but he could also get flank on coming in, so he could have a flanking 5/6 that has cleave 2. That's a possibility. So you got to look at the upside. What can he gain, and why did he lose what he lost? It's not a bad card. He does have a lot less survivability than he had before because he loses that ward, that guaranteed ward. He doesn't lose it forever. I mean, it's just not guaranteed. Now, Architect of Heresy, this is the number 1 legendary for the faction. I mentioned that Sword Backpaw is probably number 2. Architect of Heresy is number 1. The ability to take control of an infantry or Astartes from your opponent is a huge threat, and your opponent has to keep that in mind the entire game that they're playing. And when you play Architect of Heresy, you gain that troop. If it's not an infantry or Astartes, it goes back up to their hand, which is even better. That's not the initial version of this card. That's an upgrade to this card because it was just take control of a friendly infantry or Astartes. But now you have the ability to return a frontline, a greater demon. You know, cards that you couldn't target with this card, you can still target. You just don't get to take control of them, and that's very handy. Vehicles with frontline go back up to your opponent's deck, and now I can run my game. Or big nasty troop, it's mine, and I laugh in your face because I am the Architect of Heresy. Just a great legendary. That's the one that you want to save up your gems for. Now, Balthamar Squad is hard removal. We talked about soft removal with Terran Reality. Balthamar Squad has hard removal, and it also has got this great power to stun the enemy warlord. The downside of that is you've got to be able to target that enemy troop, right? So if you're facing a warlord that doesn't have troops, that's not going to do anything for you. Its cost is very high, but it's very effective. I find that 1 Balthamar Sword in decks is often good enough given a lot of the other direct damage that the faction has, but I've seen decks use 2. I think 2 is overcosted. I think if you have Architect of Heresy as your second backup, I think that's enough, and because that's a very powerful removal in of itself. Captain Apostle, I don't like these guys. The artwork is okay. The ability is not bad. And in events, I think they stand a better picture because there's a lot less hard removal in events. But typically, that 7 energy spot, these guys have got to survive, and then they've got to attack to give Daemonhost to all your Astartes, and it's just to your Astartes. Doesn't really work for me. As an epic, compared to other epics, it just feels like it's not delivering, and that's okay. This card is okay. I think that's its purpose. I think you're better off, quite frankly, going with Dark Martyr, and Dark Martyr is just hands down the best common. And we've seen some good commons, we've seen some good rares. Dark Martyr is the best common, and I've said that before in the first card by card I did for the Word Bears. When they launched with what they were and what they are now, he's now a 7 attack as opposed to a 6 attack. His ability is still the same. He has his Rally and Relentless gain Daemonhost. If he gains that ward on the Rally effect, it's almost a good game. I can't say almost. Your opponent can still have some random removal in their hand or shuffle him back in your deck. But if they don't, next turn he's going to gain Daemonhost. And if you are, if you're Zardolac, you throw your Enactus Blade on him, you give him Daemonhost 2 more times. Or if you've got that Dark Channeling, or Dark Blessing rather, you give him more Daemonhost and extra attacks. He just becomes your just monster machine. Just killer. Just a killer card. He's a common. I don't think there's any reason not to have 2 of these in your deck, quite frankly. I think every time that they work for you, you will feel happy about it. You'll feel glad. They've got solid health for solid stats. Just a good card. And the fact that they're a common, I can't say enough of. Now, Kalima the Anunnaki, stat-wise is okay. I like the fact that he's got a rally, destroyed infantry, and gain frontline and +2/+2. And I think before he just gained +2/+0. I believe that's been changed to gain +2/+2. That's not bad as a common. He's a vehicle though, so that is problematic because he's susceptible to crack grenades or Urtzi Malevolus or things that stun vehicles. So there is that to keep in mind. But for a common that can gain frontline, and all you have to do is lose a 1/1 Zealot, sure, why not? Butane Astartes, on the other hand, is kind of the opposite of that. This guy's a 10-10, which is beefy. They've got Cleave 4, which is nice, but at the end of your turn, you're destroying another random troop, not an infantry. So you could actually accidentally destroy your Dark Martyr, and that's not what you want. That becomes a risk. So while they're very powerful, the risk for them is very high, and often I don't include either of those. I would probably include Callum versus the Mutant Astartes, but I'd rather just have two Dark Martyr and go with that. Sword Talgron is another good legendary. His stats went from a 7-7 to an 8-8. He's got Frontline, which is very nice to have an 8-8 Frontline. And he's got this Rally effect, which late game at 9 energy is very good because it bolsters your hand back up with 3 Astartes that also cost 2 less. Something to be said about playing Sword Talgron at 9 energy. He gains you a Dark Martyr in your hand. Your Dark Martyr's 5 energy. He gains you an Ashen Circle, which is now 2 energy. He gains you a Sword Backpaw, which is now 1 energy. Now, if you do the math on that, that's 3 plus 5, that's 8, right? That's 8 energy. That still leaves you 2 energy to do anything else with, whether that's use an ability, play another card, and you can play all 3 of those troops on your next turn. So even if your opponent has to throw some resources and they get rid of Sword Talgron on the next turn, he doesn't survive, you can still throw down all those guys and more. Very nice card to swing games and kind of reinforce your hand, as it were. I do like Sword Talgron. I think he's a good legendary to have. He doesn't work for some warlords only in the fact of the pacing. I think that Rom doesn't need Sword Talgron, especially if you're not playing a whole lot of Ward Bearers Astartes in your deck to begin with, because he has to play with less decks. And Erebus, I think, as well, because Erebus can be very tactic heavy. The other warlords, if you build it and you have enough Astartes in your decks, then you're going to gain a benefit. But if you take a look at your deck list and you find that you've only got 6 or 7 Astartes in your deck, and one of those is Sword Talgron, then odds are he's not going to put in work for you and he's not going to be worthwhile. So he's one of those cards you have to take a look at your deck construction and ask yourself if it's worthwhile. And then finally we get to the Lauragar Dreadnought. And these guys are, I mean, the only thing they don't have is Survivor, right? They've got Ward, they've got Shield, they've got 9 attack, they've got 10 health, they've got Terror. What's not to like? Right? What's not to like? This is a strong card. One of the few vehicles within the faction. I think we've got Callum, we've got the Lauragar Dreadnought, and I think that's really it when it comes to vehicles. So it's possible to do like a supply lines Word Bearers deck. Drop these guys at 8 energy. As if your opponent doesn't have any flanking troops or hard removal that is random determined, then you have a nasty, nasty thing that they're going to face on the next turn. You have to build the deck for it. I think as a card, having one of those is nice. If you're building to do that combo, you'd want to have 2. But for 10 energy, playing one card is tricky. In some games, you're not going to live long enough to 10 energy. In other games, you'd rather play 2 or 3 cards to respond to your opponent. So it's tricky. It's a good epic. It's a solid epic, but it's not one that I would chase after. I don't think you need to have it in your deck. I'm going to talk about the counterattack here. This is just a good counterattack. There's no denying that. Your next troop this turn costs 1 less. Whether that is Demon, whether that is Infantry, Vehicle Astartes, whatever the case may be, being able to play Cygnus Squad on turn 2 with 3 energy is nice, and that's frustrating to your opponent. And then the next turn, you play the other Cygnus Squad, or whatever the case may be. Just a good card. That's just a good counterattack card to have. I don't have anything bad to say about that. I really don't. I think the faction as a whole, guys, the Word Bearers faction as a whole is not bad. They were very surprising to me how fun and flexible they are. The updates that they received bolstered the synergy that they needed. They had some expectations for the synergy with the troops and the sacrificing, having infantry, and they ran out of steam quickly. They can still run out of steam, but not as quickly. And there's a lot of cards now that synergize with each other a little bit better. And that is really important for those warlords, specifically Argel Tal, Zardu, and Loregar, who want that. Erebus benefits from the health and the other little demon trickeries, the little tactics in there, but those other guys benefit from having troops on board, from creating threats to take away the heat from your warlord. And that's what they needed to have. I think the faction, that's one of the big upsells for them, is that they can do infantry and Astartes and kind of that build that board a little bit and have some surprises with the Daemonhost, have some surprises with some tactics or some fast units, Ashen Circle, or drop some cheap demons, whatever the case may be. But they also, I think, as far as upselling goes, is they are a faction that you can start relatively early and not have to invest a lot in terms of chasing after legendaries. If we were to take a look at this faction here, in terms of legendaries that I feel that you want to have, need to have, right? There's just two. Kurthased is nice, but you don't need to have him. He's not going to win you games. Architect and Sorbackpaul are probably your biggest two. As far as epics go, besides a warlord like Zardolac, um, Ashen Circle, and that's it. That's it. I don't recommend that you need to have any of these other epics for this faction. Everything else is common and rares, and some of those commons are just amazing. Dark Martyr is just amazing, and you can have a really fun experience within the game just by playing those cards. Yeah, I think that this is just a good, whether you like it or not, this is a good introductory faction. I can't say introductory. I mean, the Daemonhost mechanic can be tricky. The sacrifice concept can frustrate some players, and some people never like to kill their own stuff. That's just, as a player who's played Magic, I don't enjoy the black style that asks me to constantly sacrifice things. I don't like to do it. I don't like to do it. If I'm going to sacrifice something, I want to sacrifice it at your face, not not just to bolster my own stuff. But this faction does it really well, and this is a very easy faction for a player to get involved and get into. In the same way that kind of the Emperor's Children are. If you want to try something different, if you're looking to get into the faction and you haven't picked up the crates, I think if you were to pick up Calth crates, or just word bearers crates specifically, you could very quickly find yourself with some tools to build a deck. And they're flexible. They work very well with the Chaos faction as a whole. Talking about the Chaos faction and new neutrals that this faction benefited from, with the addition of the Cygnus Acolytes, right, or the Cygnus expansion, as it were, you've got more Chaos Fanatics, you've got Cultists, you've got more things that are already up there in terms of infantry beyond the word bearers cards that you could include in your deck. There's so many in there. You could easily put in, for Loregar, you could put in Acleon, giving all your Chaos infantry +2/+0. Now, she came from the Calth expansion, but the Eightfold Brand came from the Malevolence expansion. All of a sudden, you have the ability to create a Cygnus cult troop in your hand every turn that you can then use with your. Yeah, it's a 5 energy cost, but for the ability to create these guys here every turn, or even just the little 1/1s that are bolstering up your demons, or this 2/3 guy, it puts in work very well. I think that's probably the best card that came out with the most recent faction. Planetary Purge arguably could work. Kind of works against you if you're not careful. It could actually start destroying your own guys. But this card can work very well. If you have Daemonhost troops that have got Survivor on them, you have less to fear. Also, talking about new neutrals that benefit them specifically, I think, where is it? Where is it? Not Death of Innocence, no. Is it the Imperial? I'm trying to remember what card. Kaisalane, that's who it was. Kaisalane works very nicely for Loregar, especially because he's a turn 1 play that you can play, gain your ability, and if you're able to put Daemonhost on Kaisalane and give him Survivor 3 on your next turn, and your opponent can't get rid of this guy, it's going to be a problem. Now, that's a legendary. Granted, that's a legendary. I understand that. Angelic Presence is also very good. This is a way to heal 3 to your Warlord, but also give health to your troops. And we're talking about ways to give your troops extra health to really capitalize or keep them on the board. That is just a great card. I've made that recommendation, I think, for several decks specifically, but for the faction as a whole, I think they really benefit. And you could make an argument for Arcology, right? Now, Arcology has seen a recent nerf to it, so it's not huge, but having a unit that's constantly putting out infantry units that you can then use to fuel your Ashen Circles or your Kurthaseds or whatever the case may be, it's good. The problem is it's high cost, right? 7 energy, Dark Martyr is a better choice to go, but if you're building a deck that is slow and you want to go that route, that's okay. Now, talking about Loregar, Merits Mercenaries. If you have a handful of dark gifts and you've got Escape Vent, and you play Merits Mercenaries and you put Escape Vent on them, and then your next turn you put like 4 or 5 dark gifts on that Merits Mercenaries, you now have just a super nasty pumped demon infantry unit. there's a lot of neutrals, especially infantry neutrals or infantry focused neutrals, that work well. I think you could argue for Desperate Defense, but I would pass on that. I would rather just play lower cost 4 to 5 energy troops and then have a couple 7+ energy troops and really maximize the word bearer's other tactics with those troops to really benefit, and then save like direct damage or fast unstoppable damage for the end game to kind of wrap up. The word bearers, they're not my favorite faction lore wise. In game though, they're very fun, they're very flexible. I don't ever not have fun playing them, and that surprises me kind of. I mean, I don't want it to surprise me, but it does. But I think they're very good. I think especially if you're looking to get into a new faction, or you want to try a new the game out and you haven't really dived into anything, these guys are not bad to start into. Or if you're just a fan of chaos and 40k, I think you'll kind of get the feeling of corruption and dark devotion that you would get if you were playing a tabletop game with the word bearers. So that's it. That's the word bearers card by card for me, guys. The reboot. I hope it has been useful. I hope you've had some good information, gotten some ideas in your head as far as what you might want to do with the word bearers, how you want to look into playing them. And if you find the video interesting, let me know. If there's other combinations that you'd like to see, or other warlords that you want to talk about, let me know as well. We get into a few more this week, and that's it. It's been a long talk for the second time around, but I hope this video, there's no issues on the recording, because if I go back into editing, and there are, I'm just going to pull my beard out. So that's it for me, guys. Until next time, keep playing Legions, and we'll talk to you later.